Broadband service has been in the news a lot in recent weeks and months as the COVID-19 pandemic has forced schools, businesses, hospitals, and ordinary people online for information and delivering services of one kind or another. Whether it's a Zoom meeting, remote learning, remote working, or telemedicine, modern broadband access and bandwidth speeds have emerged as indispensable tools to cope with the dislocation caused by the pandemic. Two routes to supplying better broadband to underserved areas are developing. One is the communication union districts that received state legislative support last year through Act 79, which set aside about $700,000 in state funds for feasibility studies for locally proposed districts. If successful, those districts could receive up to $60,000 for each district to develop a business plan to see if upgrading the local broadband infrastructure made sense financially. One of these grants was won recently by the newly formed Southern Vermont Communications Union District, centered on Bennington County. Another route that is under discussion is the Emergency Broadband Action Plan, a response by the state's Department of Public Service to the pandemic and the disruption it has caused. The plan seeks to ensure that all Vermonters have access to the internet at home when a public emergency requires sheltering in place. According to the department, about 23% of the state, nearly 70,000 businesses and residences, currently don't have access to modern levels of broadband, defined as 25 megabits per second of download speed and 3 megabits per second of upload speed. With no real certainty about how long the coronavirus pandemic will continue to affect homes, businesses, schools, and other institutions, the urgency of upgrading the state's broadband capacity has risen. The Emergency Broadband Action Plan does call for direct financial support to communication union districts, or CUDs, through the state's Broadband Innovation Grant Program. To get a handle on where all this is going, we got together, online of course, with three people who've been closely involved in these efforts. Tim Scoggins, the chairman of the Southern Vermont Communications Union District, who also serves as the chairman of the Shaftesbury Select Board, Jonathan Cooper of the Bennington County Regional Commission, and Representative Laura Sibilia, a state representative from Dover, who was one of the driving forces behind Act 79. We began by asking Tim Scoggins what were the next steps now that the Southern Vermont Communications Union District was
What
formed.
happens next? What's that feasibility grant going to be used for, and what will be sort of the next steps that we're going to be seeing?
Well, the point of the feasibility grant is to help get the CUDs off the ground. So they will be doing um, a two-part study, a feasibility study that will evaluate whether or not our group has a likelihood of making the whole thing work, getting a broadband network built in terms of just the large, I guess you might call it 30,000 foot view of feasibility. You know, is there a hope for it to work? If that is deemed to be the case, there's a second part that would go forward after approval by the state that would allow us and our consultants to develop an actual business plan, a 3-year business plan that would give more details and more specific financial information on how we get to a building of a network that is cash flow positive in 3 years. That's the requirement of the.
And Jonathan, what's going to be the BCRC's role in all of this? You guys play a big role in getting that grant approved. What will that still be something you'll be working on as well going forward?
BCRC has a more administrative role with respect to the Broadband Innovation Grant in terms of being able to sort of receive the funds from the states. One of the values of working with the regional planning commissions for a lot of the CUDs was, as those CUDs were getting the pieces put in place for organizational structure, there were some requirements for funding that the BCRC could meet in terms of having a DUNS number, having being registered with Dun and Bradstreet, having its insurance, being able to provide proof of insurance, et cetera, that are just sort of more boilerplate requirements or housekeeping requirements for the state to make grants to any entity. In terms of activity on the Broadband Innovation Grant itself, I think the application really spelled out who would be doing what, and it's largely in the hands of the sort of consultants that will be undertaking a lot of the work. BCRC sort of continues to provide a little bit of outside guidance or doing a little bit of research about other options and opportunities to try to continue providing support to the CUD on an as-needed basis.
So how does this interface with the state plan? We've been hearing a little bit about, I mean, the Department of Public Service came out with, I think it was called an emergency broadband plan, and kind of in response to the COVID-19 pandemic that potentially might be able to tap into some of the federal CARES money. And would that, it sounded like what they were trying to do is something very similar to what we're trying to get done here in Bennington County, get broadband access to folks that don't have it. Is there a tie-in between the two, or is that separate tracks?
No, there's certainly a tie-in, and there's certainly a lot of communication going on right now. And exactly the nature of that tie-in is a matter of large debate from the CUDs up through the Department of Public Service onto the legislature, as in, to what extent do we, the state, the CUDs, shift gears to take advantage of COVID relief money and to get some sort of internet to people who desperately need it right now? Or do we stay on track with our plan and the state mandate for real good, future-proof, symmetrical internet service, which probably means fiber? So that's something that we're struggling with. The plan that has been put forward, the Emergency Broadband Action Plan, I think is a good one, because it mostly talks about staying on track with our 2024 plan, the state's 2024 plan of getting broadband to everyone. But it does acknowledge that there is real need for a lot of people right now, given the lockdown and concerns that come the fall, are we going to be able to start school again, or are we still going to be trying to do distance learning? And if that's the case, we have to recognize that we still got 25% of the homes in the state don't have internet access that would allow students to do distance learning. So that's something that has to be considered. But exactly how those two interact, as I say, is a matter of much ongoing debate right now.
In a separate Zoom conversation, we asked Representative Sibilia about her take on boosting broadband capacity in Vermont.
What is your sense of the possibility that some of the federal CARES money that's coming to Vermont might be deployed towards boosting broadband service across the state? I mean,
So I think there's a tremendous amount of interest in that. The funds, we understand the funds need to be spent by December 31st. Act 79, what we put in place last year, basically said to our communities, we don't have the funds to connect you. The providers that are operating in a competitive for-profit market are not going to connect you. That's why you're not connected. And so you're going to have to do it yourself. And here are some tools: the formation of the Communications Union District, and we've seen a number of those already form, and more trying to form throughout the state. And how can we help you people on the ground, volunteers on the ground, how can we help you get it done? So thinking about the CARES Act, for me personally, it's important to me that we not undermine the very volunteers that we asked to stand up and take on this monumental task, who have responded and said, yes, we will. And yet, as they're forming, they're babies and they're volunteers, right, in many cases. And so, how can we get the supports and develop enough planning and even just the construction infrastructure to spend those funds by December 31st? That's a very that's an open question that is being wrestled with every day by legislators like myself, my chair, Ledge Council, the Department of Public Service, our number of our counterparts in the Senate, and I think there's a desire to absolutely utilize to the greatest extent that we can, as responsibly as possible, care funds, but there's no guarantee. My bias is definitely towards fiber with some wireless problem solving interspersed where absolutely necessary and where we're able to monitor it. And I would also say my bias is toward, I really see the CUDs as the democratization of the telecommunications network in Vermont. It's really largely been a for-profit product. Seen that way, it's been regulated by the market, in the internet, and as we talked about, there's so much to modern life it's critical infrastructure, education, healthcare, working, access to government. It is like electricity. There's no question. It is like electricity. And so we need that to be brought much more into the public realm and have the public be able to ensure that all Vermonters have it. And the CUDs, I think, are our foray into ensuring that.
The House Energy and Technology Committee is studying the emergency broadband proposal advanced by the Department of Public Service. Stay tuned. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.